This is an issue of human health, so it's critical that everyone get involved, regardless of party, regardless of political philosophy. Democracy is not a spectator sport.
These are industrial chemicals, and their intended use is outside the body, in products or in industrial uses like putting out fires. One of the most common uses was in Teflon nonstick pans. They've been used on furniture, and what goes onto the furniture also gets into the dust. You accidentally breathe it in, and it will get into your blood that way. Another way is these chemicals build up in other animals that end up in our food supply. And since about 2002, the EPA has been working with various industries to phase out some of them.
When this all started, I was just a local teacher at the high school. I became an advocate as I was following the news and starting to realize the depth of the situation we were in. And after watching everything transpire, my wife and I decided it was time for me to run to be mayor. So I sit here as the mayor of the village of Hoosick Falls. When this all began, I was sort of watching over Facebook, watching the news articles come and go, starting to get an idea of what was going on and starting to understand what PFOA was as a chemical, where it was used historically, where other places in the country where these issues had creeped up. It became fairly worrisome. One of the most fascinating things about this situation that we have here is how much the ball was moved by just average, everyday citizens. I mean, I'm sitting here as mayor, but before that, I was a guy who put a video online that brought some extra awareness.
Okay, I want you to do the following. I want you to pick an 18-month period of your life where you had some really great times. Swimming, playing in your yard, cooking with your family, gardening, maybe even taking part in some of the most recent cultural trends. And then you found out that for that entire time, you were slowly being poisoned by polluted water. And in that same 18-month period, your local, regional, and state government knew about it and let it happen. For a year and a half, village and town residents were drinking, cooking, showering, bathing, and playing in contaminated water. Babies were born and nurtured in this environment, all while the state leadership, from the top down, set up a culture of deflection and downplaying the facts. The chemical that tainted the water is called PFOA. It is extremely persistent. It will take hundreds of years to break down in the environment and is associated with a slew of major health problems, including various kinds of cancers. In 2005, the DuPont case settles and creates their C8 science panel. In 2007, New Jersey sets their long-term exposure guideline to 40 parts per trillion. In 2008, Minnesota sets its health risk limit at 300 parts per trillion. In 2009, US EPA came out with a short-term exposure guideline, defined as weeks and months, of 400 parts per trillion. In 2012, the same year the comprehensive C8 study results were released, North Carolina set its interim maximum allowable concentration at 1 part per trillion. And in 2014, Maine sets their number at 100 parts per trillion. And in the same year, a resident of Hoosick Falls notices a cancer cluster in the area, Googles Teflon and cancer, and discovers the link. He tests water samples on his own dime, and in August of 2014 communicates his findings and concerns to the village leadership, who passes it up to the county, who passes it on to the State Department of Health. And at this point you would probably presume that they would see a problem. Well, you're wrong. Instead, in early email communications, a DOH employee misspells PFOA, references the wrong company, and says, quote, "There are no regulatory requirements for reporting since the testing was done voluntarily." That begins a month-by-month progression of delaying action and exceptional ignorance to the studies of PFOA. Like those times when officials from the village and county asked for guidance from the state with health advisory language, only to have it finally in hand 2 months later, 4 paragraphs. It includes language like, Information on health effects of PFOA in humans is limited. Collectively, the studies are not strong enough to draw a definitive conclusion about whether PFOA causes cancer in humans. Which is weird because of all that stuff I said earlier. But the weirdness doesn't just stop there. There was that email in January 2015 that said, quote, "The biggest issue for the village is the current level of alarmism about the drinking water." So here we are, stuck with a year and a half of time that could have been as uncontaminated as we were told our water was, being asked to trust a government who didn't really see the need to act, but is totally satisfied by their, quote, aggressive response. Which is why we, the people of Hoosick Falls and Petersburg, New York, as well as many communities across the state and country who are facing PFC contamination, need answers. And these answers are important because they are our lives, they are our health, and they are the future of our children.
The contamination caused by Wolverine worldwide came to light in August 2017. There were three initial stories. There was a story in late August related to PFAS in the river in Rockford near the site of the former Wolverine tannery. That was followed up by a story related to House Street and the fact that they were finding this toxic chemicals in private drinking water wells, and the third story was that they were finding they discovered that Wolverine had dumped its tannery sludge at a Superfund site in Plainfield Township that is a known contributor to PFAS that's been discovered in Plainfield Township's municipal system. And so those revelations came about very quickly, and they really opened Pandora's box.
Well, we got involved because we were contacted by residents. So this started on House Street in Belmont when residents began to learn that they may have been drinking contaminated water. They obviously were worried about their health, they were worried about their legal rights, they really needed to consult with someone to find out what to do. We ended up having a group meeting. We heard what they had to say, what their concerns were. We began investigating the background of what was going on, understanding better the chemicals at issue, the test results that had been done, the status of the investigation, the role of DEQ and EPA with the situation. Based on that investigation, we agreed to represent various residents in the case, and those cases were formally filed in November of 2017. They're pending. The status is Wolverine has answered the complaints and denied any liability to the residents. The case, they sought to have the case dismissed. That request for dismissal was denied. They've appealed that to the Michigan Court of Appeals and the Michigan Supreme Court, and their appeals have been denied at both levels. So the case is continuing. It's currently in discovery. So we're seeking documents and information from Wolverine. Some of that's been provided and much of it has not. And we've started the deposition process, talking to former employees of Wolverine, current employees of Wolverine, other fact witnesses, people who are familiar with the dumping that occurred in the 1960s, and doing a lot of other research into the chemicals, a lot of work with experts who understand both the chemicals and how they affect people, that understand how they move in the groundwater, a whole variety of different things that have been going on.
So basically the focus has been on PFOA and PFAS, which are discontinued and used to be used. We don't know what year they discontinued them, but we have replacement chemicals in the same category that are showing up in our water. So public water testing was not published at all. So everybody thought they were only testing for PFOA and PFOS. They should be counted together in the state of New Hampshire. They shouldn't be counted separately. So the private well owners get their test results and they look immediately for PFOA and they see maybe 20 parts, 40 parts, 35 parts. One person I saw with 18 parts, and they said, "That's good, right?" And the state said, "Yes, you're under 70. So their takeaway from them, which is appalling, is if you're under 70, you're safe.
And it is much, much lower. Somewhere in the order of 12 parts per trillion, at least for one of these chemicals. So if that as levels go lower, right, in terms of what's considered safe, more people will, be above the benchmark.
Regulation of this chemical class is at least a decade behind, and Saint-Gobain has spent over a year at this point actually, disputing responsibility for the old chemicals, the PFOA, and, well, there's not much PFOS, but it's in there. Why do we think they will actually take the responsibility for the newer chemicals, such as Gen X, like you said they use, that preliminary research is showing causes harm to our bodies? You may think, Clark, that Gen X, it's wonderful because it's not showing up. PFOA has been used for how long?
Since 1951 in full industrial production.
And we're just seeing it now. So what are we going to find in 20 years from Gen X? Every day my daughter, is running around in the soccer fields and playing around in Merrimack, is breathing that junk in. It may not be in the water yet, but it's in our bodies. How can we count on Saint-Gobain for being honest when they won't even tell you, DES, what chemicals they're using? They won't disclose it.
In the case of Saint-Gobain, compared to many companies, they've been pretty upstanding. They've got some areas where their engineers have said, it's not yours, it's somebody else, and they've fought that. They have shareholders, and for their shareholders, they ought to try and make a profit. Where we've showed them, we've got data that disputes it, they're now in serious negotiations. They'd like to know what the next chemical is, and then they would like to make sure it's not showing up in the environment. And they let us go swab the stacks, they let us go take samples. They gave us samples of every chemical that they're using. From the standpoint of Gen X, part of their problem is they don't know what chemicals they're using because they're now buying proprietary blends from companies who make those blends.
Upon a lot of research and a lot of questions and a lot of badgering of state officials, we find out that they have been testing for 33 PFAS compounds in this family, which we never would have been told. The focus is on PFOA and PFAS because that is all federal regulation has focused on for many, many years. They haven't added to that list. In fact, a corporation such as Saint-Gobain uses a slew of chemicals in the same class, and by our own laws in this country, they don't have to disclose what exactly they are. And if we want to test for them, it's a seek and find mission. We're supposed to guess what to test for.
So we've been up here at this property for at least, I would say, over 20 years, and I never thought we'd have any problem with water, but everybody is experiencing that problem, no matter in Hoosick Falls, California, New Jersey, wherever you go, the water is going to continually get polluted because of industry. We need industry to make stuff, to make people have money in their pocket, have a job to go to, but yet it's causing this earth of ours to be polluted, poisoned, and eventually people will be dead.
There are maybe countless PFAS contamination sites around the country, and they affect any number of things. Other industries, airports, municipal water systems, and rivers, public bodies, public waters, fishing, in rivers and so forth. So there's wide and broad impact.
These chemicals are bioaccumulative. They build up in your blood. You cannot excrete them from your body, and they wreak havoc on your system. And even if you could get rid of these chemicals from your blood serum, the damage is done. The disruption starts in the brain, in the endocrine system, and they're just absolutely horrific, the whole class of them.
Hoosick Falls' situation is as PFOA from industrial use. There's a lot of sites that have PFOS contamination in New York and across the country that mainly come from Air Force bases, and a lot of those are Department of Defense Air Force bases.
So when you have contamination of a chemical and you've been exposed to it, what we look at is exposure, which is measured by water testing. They're doing a panel of 9 PFAS analytes for private wells. If your well tested over 70 parts per trillion, you would have some blood testing done. The blood testing has the same 9 analytes. So there is a relationship between your blood tests and your water exposure. And now we want to put the health data together with that. Those are the 3 legs of what a community has to know. Water testing, water levels, blood serum test results and your health history. So we figure this out. We're told by the state of New Hampshire that we can't have our blood tested. We can't access the lab that the state has because, as it turns out, these labs have preferred agreements, and the only people who can work with this Wadsworth lab in New York, which is what they've used, is the state of New Hampshire, and businesses can order blood work from there. So a resident cannot get their blood tested whether their doctor orders it or not. So we do not know our blood serum levels. That's really convenient for a corporation that contaminated the water of 27,000 people in this area. We do know, we've been drinking this water for about 20 years. We advocated to the state of New Hampshire. We actually collected our own health data. We went out there and hit the streets and gathered health data from people, how many years in town, and all the health conditions that we know are associated with exposure to this chemical. We tallied it all up. We brought it up to Concord, to the Department of Health and Human Services, and we said, hey, we need some help here. This is 584 people's health data without names, just aggregate data, and it's a very troubling picture. Here's the bar graph, and here's multiple conditions that people have. We need to have some blood tests.
I came to Merrimack back in 1970. I have lived the majority of my life here. Back in 2001, I was diagnosed with a soft tissue sarcoma in my leg. Since then, I have found that this MFH is the same thing as the RMS that the children are developing now in New Hampshire in clusters. I was told by my oncologist at Mass General that, in his opinion, 99.9% it was an environmental cancer.
We have to make sure that our kids are taken care of. EPA is saying, you guys are fine. We have so many incidents of sick kids, sick adults in our town. Sorry. I'm one of the... I've been diagnosed with cancer twice within 1 year.
Yeah. They don't care. Money is their god, not people's health. You've got 4 people around here with autism. The numbers of autism, 1970, 1 in 10,000, 1995, 1 in 500. This year, 15% increase over 2 years ago, 1 in 58. Same with Alzheimer's, 5.4 million in the country. 24,000 in New Hampshire with 66,000 caregivers. It's all tied into brain connection, and so many doctors are saying it's the environment, water, air, pollution, soil, all causing it. This is a cost to the whole country, let alone the emotional. I mean, what's it doing to everyone? We all know people with some of these diseases, and yet we're told it doesn't exist. Little kids with cancer, animals with tumours. Yeah. You're not telling us it's not the water.
And then I hear people talk about their cats and their cats getting sick and dying, and people need to know, and they need to just not rule out their pets getting ill or dying without looking at it and finding out why.
I never would have thought that it could have come from the water. I talked to several doctors and found out that, sure enough, this is what can happen.
I have a son with immune system issues, allergic to everything under the sun, including the best of foods, fruits, vegetables, nuts, meats, certain seafoods, trees, grasses, weeds, dust, mold, you name it. What is bringing his immune system down? Within a few years after being diagnosed with a soft tissue sarcoma, I developed thyroid cancer and had to have my thyroid removed.
And after spending decades here in Oscoda, Michigan, which I love, with my family and friends, start over. A lot of them have gotten sick, and some of them have died. And a lot of the people I know just think, it's another problem the government will take care of. People need to wake up and get involved. Our government's not going to publish on the front page of the newspapers that potentially 110 million of you are drinking bad water. It's out there. And they don't have all the answers, we know that. They might be able to clear the water well enough, but this stuff is in the ground. It's going to leach until they figure out how to remove it so it stops leaching into your drinking water. But I personally have gastritis, microscopic colitis, celiac disease, arthritis, and no one else in my family was as disabled at the young age now of 60 as I am.
We first heard in the news that there was issues here in West Michigan with the chemical, the PFOA and the PFAS, and that wells were contaminated in the Belmont area. Well, being a Belmont area resident with 37 grandchildren, 7 of my children live within the area, I was very concerned because it was a well water issue that they were reporting. Drinking water wells were poisoned, and turns out we went to a meeting in Rockford, at the Rockford High School. They talked about the levels of the water, and they were talking about a drop of water in 10 Olympic-sized swimming pools, and it wasn't a big deal until the very last statement was made that there was a well in the area that contained 38,000 parts per trillion, and they'd been talking about 70 and 300 and small, really small numbers, saying it wasn't going to have an impact on the health of people. And that was one of those moments that just shocked me to the core, and I bought the point-of-source filters that go on the sinks, and I put those on before any testing ever began because I had something in my gut that said this water could easily be contaminated in these wells. And so I took proactive steps, and unfortunately, having been in state government and in private industry and in local government, I knew things weren't going to move very fast. So that was one of the reasons I took those steps. And then I just started my research.
When the blood testing results came back and I saw that my daughter, who at the time I think was 2 years old, had a level of PFOA in her blood that was twice mine. It was over 100 parts per trillion. I opened up mine first because I thought it wasn't going to be that big a deal because we'd been only in the village for about 7 or 8 years at the time, and I saw that my results were over 50, and I was pretty stunned by that. So then we jumped to Emma thinking she's the youngest, it's probably not going to be that big of a deal, and it ended up being the highest value we had in the house.
Our law firm represents around 400 residents in Rockford and Belmont in regard to water contamination. Most of those residents have filed a lawsuit related to their property values and in some cases personal injuries that they've suffered as a result of contaminated water. We have asked the public agencies, health agencies, and Wolverine to undertake blood testing for affected residents. They've all refused to do that. So residents have been left on their own to figure that process out. There are only a handful of labs in North America that are capable of doing PFAS blood testing. And what we ended up doing is locating a couple of those labs, working with them to establish a protocol for blood testing, and ultimately 50 plus residents have had their blood tested, and those results by and large show very high levels of contamination in the body, in the bloodstream, the PFAS compounds. I mean, if you had 20 or so parts per billion of some of the OA compounds, you would be in a very high percentile, like the top percentile in the country. So lots of people will have it in their blood, but at very low levels. We've had clients that come in as high as 5,000, parts per billion. Some of the blood level results that have been obtained are among the highest recorded, like in the United States, of all the testing that's been done of people, including workers who have workplace exposure. They're exposed daily, constantly to these chemicals. Many of them don't have levels as high as what some of the residents do in the area.
And we don't have, many other states and many other areas have had access to blood testing. We don't really have that. We had a very small sample. I think 217 people were tested randomly. Of those people, only around 20 to 25 were within a 1.5 mile radius of St. Cobain. Proximity, location of residence in proximity to St. Cobain, the levels were higher. We think that if everybody was able to access blood testing, that would be confirmed probably at much higher levels.
But we're not getting anywhere asking for blood testing. They're coming up with all these reasons why we can't have it. And that to us just says they're trying to block it because they know they're at fault.
And I know ever since I learned about this, at first I was having trouble sleeping. I mean, I would wake up and I would just lay there and be like, oh my God, what have I done? Should we move? But then we put a filtration system in, and it takes a while to even trust that. Not everybody can afford to do that. There are a lot of people that live in condominiums, apartments, where they don't have control over their own water, and they need a voice.
I joined the water group and I started finding out information. I looked at the contamination zones they have. One is 1 mile, one is 1.5 miles. From ground zero, which is St. Cobain. And our house lies outside of that zone of contamination, which is what they call that. We have a private well. The first time we got the water tested, it came back as 20.4 total PFOAs in our water, which was a surprise because I wasn't expecting anything. So when the state held a big meeting in our town, DHHS came and they spoke and everything. I presented our results. And they came to me and they asked me if they could sample our water and test it themselves. So they took our water, they tested it, and the total results came back as 45 parts per trillion instead of 20.4 parts per trillion. So our water was even more contaminated than we had thought it was. We all have been drinking bottled water since October. We're in the process of getting a full house filtration system that cost us $1,100. We're getting a reverse osmosis filtration system on our kitchen sink, which is where we will have all of our drinking water come from. We need to find a plumber who can put in these systems. We're having a little difficulty finding somebody with the knowledge to do that. We're trying very hard to clean up our water. We're not getting help from the state. We're not getting help from St. Cobain. We have to put out all of this money to make sure that our family drinks clean water that is free of man-made chemicals.
So we think we're close to having a safe, permanent source of water, and I guess that depends on how you define permanent. What we are told is that Plainfield Township's wells test clean, or close to clean, and that they are filtering the water that they are getting from those wells. So the water that ultimately makes its way into the water mains and into people's homes does test either clean or very close. If those wells get contaminated down the road, then obviously we don't have a permanent supply anymore. And then there's questions, is there a filter system big enough to handle and clean all of that water?
We've been dealing with contamination for decades here. The base has been closed since '92. It's almost kind of laughed off as like it's going to be another 30 years in dealing with this. And another 30 years is just too long. Right now it looks like the Air Force will only treat to the EPA levels, even though everybody knows this is going to get worse. Even when PFHXS data starts coming out, they know that's just going to compound the issue. Right now they've said they will treat at the source. To them, the source is whatever happened on Wordsmith. But because this has gone on for so long, other areas have become secondary sources because their sources have leached into places such as Clark's Marsh or into Van Etten Creek, and they need to come in and treat those also, or this just drags out the problem that much longer, creates such health problems not only for the people but for the environment. We just want the Air Force to come in, tackle the problem. We don't really care why it's there, just get rid of it.
I'm an Oscoda resident for the last 10 years. I was an environmental engineer for the Environmental Protection Agency for 38 years, but I became concerned about the contamination that has been found to be going on for a couple of decades. I found out about a Restoration Advisory Board capability to bring the public officially at the table with the agencies, the Air Force and the Department of Environmental Quality. And so I convinced the township to put in an application for that, and the Air Force approved it, and we started our meeting in 2017. Community side of the Restoration Advisory Board elected me as co-chair. So for the last 6 months, I've been working with our community members and the Air Force, who's also a co-chair, and putting it together and having meetings, which we publicize and get the public involved, and they can ask questions at the end of the meeting. But more importantly, we're broadcasting it on YouTube so they can really hear what the decision makers are saying. First couple of years, when it was first found in 2012 by the DEQ, the Air Force actually took a pretty quick stance and action. Actually, I have a picture right here that shows the "Do Not Eat the Fish," and it's an Air Force site manager who's putting the sign up along the river in downtown Oscoda, and that was in 2013. And then they put on a filter 2 years later to start cleaning the groundwater and the pollution going into Clark's Marsh that goes into the Osalba River. But after that, the Air Force and the DoD Department of Defense found that there were so many sites across the country and drinking water was involved, they were running out of money. Each one of these filter units costs about $3.5 million and about $500,000 a year to operate. And we've been working with our congressionals and they're starting and have in the last 5 months really starting to work the problem, and they did add $54 million in the last Department of Defense budget, but that's just a drop in the bucket. It needs to be measured in billions. So that takes the president to authorize that amount of money.
As far as the Air Force goes, they've shown quite a bit of resistance. They say they want to help, but when we ask for help, they don't give it. They seem focused on treating only what is in the previous boundaries of the Air Force Base. We've asked them about remediating Clark's Marsh, since that is heavily contaminated, and they said they have no interest in it. There are some areas where they've made progress. There's a new granulated activated carbon system, but that's only going to take care of a small portion. We still have large areas that need to get remediated. I think the danger to Lake Huron is significant. Everything that's coming out of Wurtsmith Air Force Base is leaching into rivers, and within 24 to 48 hours, that's being carried straight into Lake Huron. So you can go take a measurement of Lake Huron, and it's very low levels, but it's just continuous. Whatever's leaching out of just Wurtsmith alone is getting into Lake Huron, and then other municipal systems that are drawing in their water are getting Wurtsmith contamination that's affecting millions of people. The sooner they can get Wurtsmith remediated, the sooner they can start bringing levels down in Lake Huron.
I think we've lost some trust in our elected officials and our agencies a lot, including the agency that I worked 38 years for, EPA. But we need to push them and hold them accountable. But we also have to realize that someone has to pay for this research and work, and that's the taxpayer. I'm a firm believer that the Air Force was not told about the health effects when they started using this in the 1970s. They didn't find out until the late 90s, 2000.
If you've got any common sense to you, you know that the water that's up here and the water going into the ground is going deeper and deeper and deeper. It has chemicals in it. It's going deeper and deeper and deeper. Once it hits the open vein, which is just a tube, to you people that don't know about it, just a tube of water, and it's flowing in like an underground river. That's going to pollute everything from that point down. And nobody from New York City, New Jersey, California is going to come up here and say, oh boy, you got a nice piece of property. You got 30 acres, 40 acres. Jesus, I want to buy it. Then how was the water? And you say you got bad water? They're not going to buy it. They're going to go elsewhere.
The Rockford-Belmont area was a hot real estate market until this happened, and it's cooled off considerably. Now, people are still able to sell homes, but it's taken a lot longer. They're having to drop the price. They got to prove that they've got safe water somehow, so they're putting water filtration units on the main line into the house, a whole house filter. Well, you got to maintain that. At some point, the carbon in that filter becomes saturated with PFAS, and then the chemical, it's not as effective, and so the chemicals just start passing through the filter. And so there's these homes that, unless they're connected to a safe water supply, are going to have to be sold with a deed restriction on them. Well, that deed restriction is going to, depress property values. If there's a lot of them in a particular municipality, then that's going to suppress property values across the board.
First of all, we have a lot of foreclosures in our area, which doesn't have anything to do with the water, except some of us said, well, this is a good time for me to walk away. And that in itself has dragged down a lot of our property values. We do everything here, but we don't have a lot of commercial in Hoosick Falls. But these are residential, and that's where most of the people in town are more concerned about what their property values are.
I emailed 3 girlfriends in town that are realtors, saying what are realtors telling their incoming buyers. One of them never replied. One of them came back with a pathetic answer and then didn't expand when I questioned her. The other one, no answer, but she's now got the 5 gallons of spring water in her kitchen. What does that tell you?
When I was sitting with the group of women from Merrimack and listening to their stories, and watching the tears and the frustration and the emotion, and in my head I'm relating to them and listening to them saying, I'm sick, my children are sick, my family is sick, I've had cancer twice, I have ulcerative colitis, I have immune problems, and I can feel the steam coming out of my ears. There's no release. Because we've been dosed. There's nothing to do about it now. Once you get cancer, all you can do is treat after the fact. Well, here's an opportunity. If these states would get together, we could stop some cancers. How is that not initiative enough to do something, to do more? We can stop a child from getting cancer. We can stop a mom from going and having her kidneys operated on. We can stop a daughter from having to go get her thyroid removed. I don't understand that part of it. And it's frustrating as hell that these companies won't look at us as people. I don't understand how our government, our elected officials, people who are supposed to be representing us, put us dead last to corporate money. It's insane. Makes absolutely no sense as to who we are as a country.
You certainly learn from other people's activities. There's precedent. Sometimes there's legal precedent on how these things get resolved, although in these types of cases there's not a lot. You can analogize to other situations that involve other toxic torts, other chemicals, other spills, and environmental damage. So you can certainly do that, and a lot of that law, I'm sure, will impact how these cases are resolved. But we're in a very fluid situation.
The state of Michigan has, I think, tested something like 4,700 wells for PFAS, not just in the Rockford area, but across the state, because what happened with Wolverine is it really forced the state of environmental agency, the DEQ, to sit up and take notice.
The DEQ just recently finally announced cleanup criteria for these chemicals, just a couple of them, PFOA and PFOS, not even addressing all the other PFAS compounds. And at the federal level, EPA is undertaking more research into what the appropriate guidelines should be, whether there should be a drinking water standard and so on. So all of this is happening in real time, and I'm sure it'll have some effect on our cases.
Because once the state stops taking care of the water for the people in Hoosick Falls and stops taking care of the water systems that they put into the houses in the towns of Hoosick Falls and around the Hoosick area, once they pull out, the people are not going to have the money to maintain those tanks and the filters out of their own pocket. But so they still got their poisonous water full of the chemicals, and God knows what else is in there besides the PFOAs. That's all they tested for. There could be another chemical in there. You never know. But anyway, they say, if you can believe the politicians, they're a bunch of liars. They tell you what they want to tell you, and then they walk away and they say, forget those guys. They don't know nothing. They're so dumb. We'll just raise their taxes and tell them their property is worth more now than it ever was in history. Yep.
Well, you hope that it gets made right. That's what you hope. You have lost a value, you want that replaced, and that can be replaced with cash. So that's the bottom line. That's how the homes were measured in dollars of value before all this happened. They can be measured in dollars of value after all this happened, and there's a difference between those two numbers, and that is one of the things that Wolverine owes these residents. The ultimate dollar amount will be determined by an expert. So those experts are engaged right now. They're reviewing the data, they're making decisions, and there's more facts coming in. So that's to be determined as part of this discovery process and the litigation, and it's likely to be different depending on where people are. We represent people who are literally adjacent to the dump. They're going to have the greatest amount of loss and exposure because no one wants to live adjacent to the dump. The people who live down the street are going to have significant exposure and significant loss in value. Presumably, the further out you get from this, and the less likely you'll have increased impact in the future, then correspondingly the lower the loss and value to your property. Obviously, this has been a significant distraction to their work lives, their professional lives, their family lives. Many things that they had hoped to do, they haven't been able to do. Just by way of example, one of our clients is a family with a young child who was breastfeeding. And because the mother had been drinking the contaminated water, they made a decision to discontinue breastfeeding. And that was a very significant event for them. That is not what they wanted to do. That's not what they intended to do. But they were put in a position where they just didn't feel they had any other choice.
The beach that you see right here was the Air Force Base beach. Many people use this area, including myself. I believe that I was exposed to these contaminants back in the 80s. I worked as a lifeguard on this beach and for 3 years and swam in it constantly. They say that surface water or dermatological exposure is not a problem, but we don't know that. Again, the studies are not conclusive about that. They're very limited about dermal exposure. There's visible foaming on the shores of Manhattan Lake. Now there are different kinds of foam. There's natural occurring foam that many people who live on lakes or visit lakes, they see. But the foam that we see here on Van Etten Lake is a different kind of foam. According to the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, they'd never seen that. And so they are in the process of attempting to figure out how to test it and to contain it.
Our village ended up facing some really awful possible settlement agreements with the companies who were responsible for the polluting. Fortunately, enough people came forward from all across the state as well as the community, and those situations turned around. And there were a lot of questions at that time. This was back in early 2017 of what was going to happen next. In our situation, we had a Facebook page that ended up being sort of the go-to location for everyone in the village and even outside the village, people who were following the situation, because the Facebook page became sort of a trusted spot. There were no politics involved in it, and it was less about forcing an opinion. It was just, here's the information, here's the latest stuff, here's the latest news story. So I think getting the information in people's hands and getting organized and getting educated on what is going on is really essential. After that, I think the next most important component is getting in contact with other communities who've gone through it. There are way too many communities who've gone through it. And we're all at different stages, and we all have different situations. You know, each situation is unique in its own way, but we're also very similar in the challenges we're facing, the pursuit of trying to get answers and get things to happen.
I feel very comfortable right now of who's got our back. But it took pissing people off to run for an office. That's not an easy thing. You think, how much time could village mayor take up? Plus, Rob's a music teacher at the school and he has 4 kids. And he talked with his wife about it for a long time, about how much he was going to give up to do this. And he's been getting some crash courses on the political end, which isn't pleasant.
I wasn't going to ask about PFAS, but the chair lady has brought it up. You guys said you're detecting it and you're cleaning it up where found. Has it been banned?
Yes, there was.
So you're saying that
some of the materials,
some of the material has been banned, but they're still using PFAS in firefighting.
Yes, some of the PFAS PFOA compounds, but there's thousands of them. Some of them, the worst ones were banned a number of years ago.
So I guess what I'm saying is that if you're looking on detecting it and cleaning it up, that's fine. But why aren't we banning the cause so you don't have to do that? So it's done. It causes cancer. Is there a problem with it?
The worst substances were banned a number of years ago. They're ubiquitous in consumer products.
So what you're saying is today the stuff that's been used in the firefighting foam does not cause cancer or liver disease.
I'd have to get back to you on the exact ones that are in the firefighting foam.
Today I rise to speak in support of my substitute for House Resolution 228. I believe this resolution to be well-intentioned and a step in the right direction. However, the framework it is proposing could be stronger. For instance, in the resolution, the Scientific Advisory Committee established to ensure this money is used properly is to be comprised of experts from government, academia, and industry, whose backgrounds include experience with PFAS, but it lacks any representation that would speak solely in the public interest. There are many unfortunate examples of situations where the government and industry have not acted in the best interest of the public, and I would hope we, as representatives of the government, would welcome more accountability to the people that we serve.
If there had been more clear regulations and clear guidelines as to what to do when the situation crops up, I think that would have saved a lot of headaches. I mean, when Hoosick Falls happened, there were questions within the state about what do these numbers mean, how big of a deal is it, and we didn't have anything within the state to work off of. And we knew, because we had educated ourselves, that this was a serious deal, and we had gotten to see some of the things that came out of the Little Hocking situation in the Ohio Valley. So we surrounded ourselves with data to get an understanding of what was going on, so that we could use that data and that understanding and that science to figure out what needed to happen. Once Hoosick Falls happened, and once the situation became so large across the state and even into other states, then when other situations creeped up, like Bennington, like Newburgh, everyone knew what to do because we had already sort of watched it. And in a sense, a lot of people knew what not to do because there had been so many missteps early on.
13 states outside of New Hampshire decided last summer collectively to form a national PFAS coalition, is what we call ourselves, to share information and find out what have other people done that's actually worked.
We have about 3 or 4 people in this coalition. They actually have a group called Toxic Actions Center that is helping organize monthly meetings, guest speakers. So there is a national group, and they are really actually quite effective. For example, the recent EPA summit, we really did push towards having a community participant in that group, and we were able to get one participant from this action group. We reached out to one of the more prominent or well-known sites, which is Rockford in the Grand Rapids area. One of the leaders there, Cody Angel, he started Demand Action from Plainfield Township. And from that group, it evolved to Michigan Demands Action.
I was on Facebook reading a couple things on some local Facebook groups, and it was talking about the contamination on House Street. It got me thinking a little bit more about Plainfield Township. So we started researching, going to the library. We also started FOIAing information, and we were finding out that each time we FOIA'd, we found additional information that indicated that the township's wells were at one point contaminated and required further testing to indicate whether the wells were contaminated or not. So after about 4 months of research with my partner with Demand Action, we started uncovering more and more information that the EPA, the DEQ, Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and the Kent County Health Department knew that the township's wells at the time were continuing to be polluted. We started trying to obtain additional information and trying to relay it to residents. And that's when me and Travis at the time decided to create a Facebook group called Demand Action from Plainfield Township. I used Facebook as a huge instrument in getting the information out there through live streaming these board meetings to using Facebook just to relay any and all information that the board was telling us. Within 2 weeks, we grew from a 2-member basis to a 2,000 group. And then a couple weeks later, we grew into a 4,000 member group. And the really cool thing about this group was it was a community-led grassroots movement.
Now, we learned about the Wolverine situation here in Michigan because there was citizens who were paying attention and brought it to our attention.
What I felt right from the beginning was that there was going to be significant litigation taking place. So a lot of the information that would have been given to us open like they're doing in North Carolina was probably held close to the vest, both by the government officials, the industry, and we weren't getting answers. The best of both worlds would be if the government was working with the citizens and we could work together, and litigation is going to take place no matter what. Significant harm has been done to some of the citizens, but when you hear things like the Attorney General won't let us release this information yet, I'm concerned that we aren't getting that transparency. And all we ask for is the transparency that we're adults. We know that we can handle information.
So in the meantime, we have this corporation in town who is negotiating for 2 years behind closed doors with the Department of Environmental Service and We thought our town was involved, and we thought our water department was involved, and we're told that as it's a mediation process, there's no right to know. We asked that residents be represented and that our voices be there at the table. We were told that this was taken care of and assured that they knew our needs and they were going to take care of this. So we had updates every month for a year and a half from the state, really no progress whatsoever. Recently, this spring, we find out that they made an agreement, they signed a consent decree, which is not an acknowledgement of responsibility. They're trying to say they're good neighbors and they're doing the right thing.
The best thing would be to overturn the municipality and the members on the municipality who had been there since the 1950s.
And they're not employees, they're just a board of commissioners that oversee.
Correct. And they, unfortunately have very limited view of progress, and we've done things this way since the 1950s. Part of the plan was to overthrow the MVD and try to close them down. They weren't working for our best interest. While we were doing that, we saw that a number of seats on the MVD Commissioner's office were up for renewal. So strategically, we tried to get members of our water group who had some knowledge of the contaminants, some knowledge of the dangers, and how we were having to fight constant battles day in and day out.
These battles weren't just against the water district.
No.
We had EPA, DES, DHHS, doctors, researchers. Oh, you don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with the water whatsoever.
Correct. I drank the water since 1956.
We grew up drinking water, as we said. You didn't have orange juice and soda. You had water. So what have we done to our body for 30 years?
So fortunately, good or bad, I was elected for the board, and two of my colleagues have been elected for the board as well. So now we're able to affect some change.
Yeah, this is our cottages here, Coles Lakefront Cottages. We have a very good business here. We book out every summer, and we're noticing this summer a drawdown, or we're not getting the renters that we have been getting. Myself, I believe it's from the contamination. Several years ago we came home, and in our mailbox was a letter not to drink or cook with the water. I have two wells here, one for the cottages, one for the house. They both have contamination. We have notices in each cottage, and it tells them what the situation is with the drinking water. We have Culligan water that was supplied by the state, and we tell them what the DEQ has said about the foam that's on the lake that's developed.
There's quite a swath of contamination that interfaces into Van Etten Lake, and that's been happening for so long that the levels in the lake are high enough that when the wind blows, it churns up the waves, which actually regenerates AFFF firefighting foam. So on a windy day, you can walk along our beach and you will see firefighting foam.
Right now, several homes on my road aren't even being considered by real estate agencies. And we need to all step up here in Oscoda, bring attention to this, not try and bury it and think it's going to go away. See, I worry about my kids and grandkids, what kind of future they're going to have. And Michigan is supposed to be pure Michigan, and I don't see us, but the main thing is write your legislatures and tell them how it's affecting you and what you would like to see done.
My family has a place on Van Etten Lake in Oscoda, Michigan. We're located directly across the lake from the former Wortsmith Air Force Base. We're mostly there in the summertime, and we use it for recreational purposes, boating, swimming, and just enjoying the outdoor beauty there. We also use the lake differently than before because there has been an issue with foam that has developed from the PFAS substances, which contains it's been found to contain some pretty high levels of the contaminant. I think generally in the surface water in the lake, it's not as bad, but it seems to accumulate in the foam and in the surface water surrounding the foam. So we do our best to keep our pets, the dogs, away from that, young children. So we just avoid, going in the lake when that occurs, at least for swimming purposes.
A lot of people come up here with their families year after year for boating, fishing, swimming. They've had high levels of PFAOs and PFOs and AFFF. As far as swimming in the lake, right now we're being told that it's not harmful and that our kids are okay as long as they don't swallow the water. Well, if you're a toddler and you're playing in the water, stuff happens. I joined the NOW group to become an advocacy for our community as well as our children and our wildlife. We need our water to exist.
As we progressed along in Oscoda, what really was a turning point there was the emergence of this foam, because all of a sudden it was a visual, living, can't wish it away kind of phenomenon that wasn't there before. And I took pictures of it. I sent it to some news reporters. And that very same day as well, I had been invited to go meet with a group of folks who were trying to get organized. And I remember saying to them, I hope you aren't offended with me, but I've sent this to some news reporters. That almost to a person in that room, they said, we've done nothing so far and look what that's gotten us. Here we are today. And so on that day, basically the group Need Our Water, I don't think we had a name at that time, but the group Need Our Water, the community group, really began to come together.
We want people to see this village as we see it, as a good choice to live, as a good choice to start a business, which is, both have been happening over the past year. People have been moving in, businesses have been starting and have been very successful here. The thing that's going to make people take the plunge and take the risk of moving here or opening a business is to know that the situation is being handled or the situation is solved.
We were the first one to have the problem. Right. That's why so many communities reached out to us. Okay, it's time to market the area. We have a great area. When all the news crews came in here, I took them past the pool and the skating rink and the playground and the school, everything you could think of. The water has become a little bit of an issue, but the community itself is still good. We have a lot of volunteer organizations left and right. If anybody in this town needs anything, the entire town steps up for it. And remember why we all still didn't move out. We didn't move out because we don't want to move out, and we want to live here. In St. Cobain, when the Kiwanis Club was redoing the playground, they donated the chair. I mean, they did a lot to help the community. And they bought this problem. This was never their problem. They bought it.
Outside of Hoosick Falls, the only thing that people are going to know are what the headlines say. And right now the headlines are Hoosick Falls has a water problem. Once we have an alternative water supply, then we can start to trump the fact that our water problem is solved. Here are all the things that you've been missing. Come give it a shot.
Part of it, the workers that are in the factory, there's some concern, with their jobs. They're worried that if you continue to push, the company will pull out. That's not my biggest concern. The jobs are important, but that's only 200 jobs. There's 3,500 people on the municipal water supply. So 3,500 is a lot more important than 200. And you also don't need a job if you're sick or dying.
But it's, the first thing I commented on when I was hearing about this, of course, being a chef, real food, it got to me. I said, well, okay, I'm right, aren't I? We use this contaminated water for our tea, our coffee, our sports drinks. We water our fruit and vegetables in the summer because being New Hampshire, we have farm stands, we have the farmer's market, we grow our own fruit and veg. Right. So here's all this water being used in town. We wash our fruit and vegetables in this water. We cook our rice and pasta in this water that absorbs it. Our shower, we absorb it through our skin. And you're telling us there's nothing to this? But it's bioaccumulative. We were just saying it's 12 years to move out of our body perhaps before it's safe?
If you never had any more.
If you never had any more. Right. And, when we had the meeting before Christmas, the school board agreed immediately to put filtration in for the schools because they realised the kids were the most vulnerable and the most at risk. We know we've got Anheuser-Busch in Merrimack for the beer. They don't use Merrimack water for the beer. Another microbrewery in town, they don't want to rely on Merrimack water, so they've got reputable filtration and testing done. Well, if their business, the success, depends on the purity of that water, that tells you something very strongly.
So I grew up in this gardening family, and I've always had a green thumb. Even here in the village where I've lived on this street for the last 6 years, I found space and planted tomatoes and peppers and zucchini, and I'm 3 blocks from McCaffrey Street. And the first time I planted a garden, and I can't say that it's the soil per se, like my peppers didn't grow 1 year, but the zucchini went crazy. Zucchini is one of the vegetables that sucks up PFAS. And then you start learning about the Gen X, the C6, and this stuff is still maybe coming out of this tax. What is still coming out and landing on our ground that they haven't told us about? So now I won't do any veggies at all. I just do flowers.
At this point, we're almost 6,000 people strong. We have an epidemiologist on our team. We have former EPA, former DEQ members, and we're just, we're raising awareness about contamination throughout our state.
If it's found that there's contamination in another community, I think the best thing they can do is, first of all, educate themselves heavily about the contamination, what effects it has, and then convey that message to legislators so that laws can be enacted to help protect them. Several legislators seem to not be very well educated in contamination, and they're concerned about the fear of it hurting industry. But that has to be overcome, and the more the people speak about it and educate legislators on it, then the more effective those legislators can be at enacting law. The more effective the federal government is at it, then the more likely the state governments will follow. But the states can still enact their own legislation that the DOD will have to follow.
The people that have been exposed already, they need to make sure that they're not exposed any longer, getting alternative water supplies, how they, in the best way possible. They can educate their physicians. Right now, physicians aren't even well aware of the effects, or that these people may have been exposed, and that there are some people that have illnesses that cannot be explained. and they may not have even considered the fact that they've been exposed to PFAS.
There is so much that is associated with this particular problem that people need to be aware of. And I guess that's what I want to say. It's for people to be aware of your environment. Check it out. Check out your children. Watch yourselves. And if you start feeling like something is wrong, get it checked out.
I would encourage everybody, whether you've got sickness in your family or not, because you may have it down the road, to get yourself educated. What's going on in my town? Learn how your town is run. If you have public water, who's running the public water? What kind of tests are they doing on that water? If it's a private well, then you need to get your well tested for PFAS chemicals and a whole slew of other chemicals to find out whether or not that is healthy for your family. Even before you come here, even before you buy, learn about the community you're going to be living in. What kind of businesses are there, what these businesses do in terms of manufacturing or what have you.
You've got to look out for yourself, and you got to do what you think is best for you. If you find that there's something that you hear that just doesn't sit right, doesn't make sense, don't just accept it and move on. Ask the questions.
I think it's important to consider where information's coming from when you read about this sort of stuff. You need to listen and read critically. And you need to remember that if you're listening to a township supervisor tell you that the water is safe, well, how does he know? Most people are not experts. Certainly not local, municipal officials. You need to, go and find out for yourself.
Question. There's nothing wrong with questioning the various agencies, whether they're on a federal level or a state level or a local level.
Find the information. Be your own advocate. Talk to your neighbors. Talk to your friends.
If you're too afraid to speak, write letters. I wrote to senators. I wrote to DES, which is our environmental services in the state. Paid a visit to the MVD office. And through all of that communication over and over and over again, eventually they may listen, they may effect change.
Pay attention to the water quality reports. Pay attention to the reporting that's done by the local media. And if you feel like you're seeing stuff that you should be, there should be more attention paid to, call those reporters and say, hey, do you know about this?
The Freedom of Information Act, which is commonly known as the FOIA, is a law that gives you the right to access information from the federal government. Under the FOIA, agencies must release any information that is requested unless that information is protected from disclosure by law. The FOIA also requires that agencies automatically disclose certain information, including frequently requested records.
Some really good things have come out of this. The governor's office implemented $2.5 billion, and it's called the Clean Water Infrastructure Act. So people, it's not just what's contaminated water. We're talking about old pipes that are 145 years old. It opened up the entire water quality issue. What happened here affected state law and budget. New laws have been passed on testing programs throughout the state, which benefits the small towns, because prior there was no testing done on municipal systems that had less than 10,000 people, which is, possibly how Hoosick Falls squeaked by all this time without anybody knowing what was in the water because we weren't required to test. That law's now been changed. We have this new filter. First we had a temporary, and now they just built a bigger permanent filter, and that's now been tested. It's running, so we know that the water's getting filtered.
We've made quite a bit of progress in regards to trying to get clean water to our residents. That includes making a water main extension so that they can come off of the contaminated wells and get put onto the municipal water system. The USDA had granted us $500,000, and the state just recently provided us another $300,000 so that these people can get a connection with minimal cost.
Every day that I'm on Twitter, a new community comes up facing the same PFOA, PFOS water crisis as they're testing naval bases, military bases all around the country. If you're adamant and persistent and you keep asking the questions and you keep going for the information and you keep up the fight, you'll get more and more information from the people you need it from. Do not give up. It might be a really long battle, a really long fight. It's exhausting, it's tiring, but you have to keep going and fight for yourselves.
You know, I think we're in a better place with the new mayor involved. You know, he's pushing for the issue. He believes in it. You know, I believe that there's a stigma attached to the water that's going to take some time to overcome. But, you know, in 20 years, I hope that, you know, the community is flourishing. You know, I think that once there's confidence restored in the community, in the water supply, in the air, I think that the economic development can come from there. Once people know that they're safe, they can come back. You know, I think the community as a whole, with trying to get the kids involved and to understand the issues that we currently have, I think that that's going to be beneficial down the road. They know what they're dealing with.
Trillions of dollars was spent fighting the Cold War. Now it's time that we put significant money into fighting the war of the contamination in our groundwater and drinking water. The long-term research and the emerging contaminants you hear, we know enough now to take the actions that are necessary to start. So that's what we need to do now.
What's made this grassroots movement stick out the most was because it showed that any ordinary human being was able to obtain this information and being able to form their own conclusion on if this contaminant is something that they should be worried about. We've had so many residents just take a few hours out of their week and just dedicate to this cause. And at the end of the day, all we want is access to clean water. And what we found is it's quite the opposite. We do the bare minimum testing from anywhere from 70 chemicals to 128 that we regulate. And there's 80,000 contaminants that we don't test for.
Washington State passed a law, first ones, to make sure there's no PFAS in the food packaging products. The pizza boxes, Chinese food cartons. They're the first ones that passed a ban on PFOAs on the food packaging. Is that all PFOAs? Or just the ones we know about? Who knows? They're going to replace it with something. Is it going to be better or worse? They agreed through the stewardship program to phase out C8. What'd they replace it with? C6. Well, now C6 is testing to show the exact same health effects as C8. C6 is unregulated. They are out looking for a quote-unquote clean water source. The question is, will we ever find one? And if we do happen to find one, Will it stay that way? We don't know if there's PFOA 20 feet down and it hasn't hit that clean water source yet, and will it hit in 10 years? If we hook up to a clean water source and they take the filters away, what happens if it gets contaminated? So it's rolling the dice, it's the crapshoot. Well, now we gotta go here, and now we gotta go off on this, and think of the time it takes. And in the meantime, people are ingesting the shit. As you're seeing in Cape Fear, they have now found 33 PFCs in the water down there. 33. Do you think ChemMars told them that was in there? Nope. Now look, you start reading about all the pharmaceuticals they're finding in the water. So you start reading about all of this, and then now the pesticides, along with what we know of like the PCBs. So the question becomes, is there water left in the water?